Hi, everybody. It's Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with For Better For Worse.
Tonight, Lisa's not going to be with us tonight. She's not feeling well. So it's just the two of us again, actually. Today we're going to be talking about criteria in dog training. So let us know you're out there. And it's something that we don't talk about often. Well, we do, but not specifically in that topic. It's always incorporated in our talks, but we wanted to highlight it a little bit more, only because as trainers, most of us have made a mistake on timing or not being clear on that criteria. And now that in nose work and some of the other sports, you can see what some of the mistakes are based, or the criteria was a little fuzzy, and the dog misunderstood. And it's no different than if you went to a foreign country and they were talking to you in another language, and you weren't real 100% clear about what they were telling you, or the answer to a question. You weren't getting that clarity. So, and that's what criteria helps, right? Is to provide clarity in training for the dog. And so for us, it's really hard. We humans tend to have a little bit of a difficult time being clear. They think, well, the dog should know it. I hear this all the time. Well, he should know it. Well, really? Why? How? Why should he know it? Did you teach him that? Did he know it? How should he know it? Right? That's always a question. Why do you think he should know it?
Well,
And I usually get a blank stare coming back at me
I,
when I ask that question.
either that or you get, well, he does. He totally knows it, which is you are a lucky one, and you get a smile and nod dog, which is me when I'm like, okay, right? Versus the dog that's like, you're stupid and walks away. Because there are two types, right?
Right,
100%.
right. Yeah, and a lot of times, if a dog is when you're looking at behavior, you want to be sure that you somehow, some way, you didn't reinforce it, because you're not getting the behavior just because, right? Usually, there's always a reason why you're getting it, and there's always, and usually it's something that we've done or not done, or somehow got fuzzy in the you know being clear about it, right? Because criteria helps you be clear. And I myself has like, well, when I get a behavior I don't like, I always wonder, like, why am I getting that? Caused that? What caused that miscommunication? Because I don't want that. But inadvertently, somehow I got that. So always have to look back and think, okay, how did I get it, and why did I get it? So that's why I wanted to kind of, and it really does help you stop and think, like, okay, what did I do to cause X? Um, and I'm going to use a specific example of myself. When I put my lab on odor, now mind you, I've put thousands of dogs on odor, and we've done it a million times. And my lab, when I put her on odor, she was only on odor for a couple of weeks, and usually we pair it for a little while. And again, I've done it. I don't know. I don't know how many dogs. Mine and other people's never had a problem. For whatever reason, when I took the pairing away, which I take the pairing away relatively soon, my lab could not find the odor by itself, and I thought, well, that's weird. Somewhere, somehow, in the process of training her, she thought that that she was looking for odor and food, which again doesn't happen very often. We don't usually have that problem. Haven't had it in all the years we've been teaching Nosework, and my other dogs never had that problem. But for whatever reason, with this particular dog, in our particular process, somehow that's what she understood. So then I had to go back and help her understand, clarify. That's not what I wanted. I wanted her just to find odor. It was a very easy fix. It wasn't anything difficult or complicated. I was able to take care of it relatively quickly. But see, that's one example, right? That she she in her mind, or somewhere in the training, and somewhere in my communication, that's what she understood, right? And that's not what I meant. I meant the other thing. Again, it's not a big deal. It's not a life and death thing, but that's somehow in our communication, in my criteria, I messed up somewhere and wasn't clear. Once I clarified it, she was fine. Obviously, she was not a problem.
Yep. And like for any of you guys that tuned in last week when we showed some of the trick teachings, right? It's interesting because if you have a dog, and I use border collies because they're quirky and weird and try and anticipate what you're thinking before you think it. Right. But when you have a dog that's figures things out really quickly, it can take a couple of reps before you have something solidified to the dog, like, no, you meant this. And you're like, yeah, but I messed up. I didn't actually mean that. And some of the dogs are like, no, I'm pretty sure you did. So it depends on who your dog is, but you can create some pretty solid behaviors without even meaning to.
Mm-hmm.
And it again, some dogs, watching the Doberman, watching Bam, it takes him a long time to be like, what? But once he gets it, he gets it. So I can mess up a lot with him or change things or whatever before we solidify what the thing actually is. The border collie, not so much, right? So again, it just depends on what kind of dog you have and how they learn, but
Right.
be
Yeah,
aware.
and the lab really, when it comes to food, like she was really thinking it again, it took her really nothing to figure out to for me to clarify it for her. And obviously she doesn't have any, she has no issue, but that was an interesting little thing. I'm like, well, look at that. Somehow I taught her that's what she thinks I want. And somehow I know she just didn't pull that out of her butt. Somewhere she thought that's what I wanted. So it was an interesting little learning for me. Again, used the methodology we've used forever. It's had never been a problem with anybody, and most of with all the hundreds and thousands of dogs that we've worked with. But for her, for whatever reason, it wasn't quite what I wanted, and she, for whatever reason, thought that it was. So, but and that's specific to Noseworth. But how many things what are behaviors you're getting that for whatever reason the dogs might think? So when you're getting a behavior that you're not really particularly care for, you don't like, somewhere along the road we've reinforced it. Could be that um we reinforced it just by accident, when we weren't looking or we weren't really paying attention, they learned it, or we inadvertently, our timing was off or something like that, or our criteria wasn't clear, and that's what the dog thinks we wanted. So
Yeah. So I'm curious, so those of you that are out there, do you guys have anything that maybe you've noticed over the years that you've done to your dogs? I'll give you an example. My very first agility dog, I didn't know anything about agility. And my weave pulls consisted of my arm going in, out, in, out, in,
oh
out.
god.
Right?
Yeah.
That's how I was taught in the very, very beginning, right? And my dog, to the time she died, was like, this is how we do weave pulls. So, but I literally had to totally retrain it, which sucks. You guys have heard us say a long time ago, right? It's so much easier to teach something correctly from the beginning than to have to undo it and train it new, because it's harder for the dog to understand that. So it got to the point, when she was 10 years old, I was having if she did 12 pulls, we were like, yay, and we'd run off the course and have a party, because it was that ingrained in her that she needed me to be right by her side. So
Yeah, and luckily with Jive, it wasn't that far down our journey, so it wasn't that solid, thank God, because it was only 2 weeks in. So I was able to, and I don't train every day, obviously, but it was just enough for her to go, oh, that's what I think it is. So when I went and separated it, so if you pair for too long, for some dogs, could you imagine have, like, when we started a long time ago, we paired for a very long time. Again, we paired with Cha Cha, we paired for a year. But never was a problem when we separated it and out, and it was never an issue. But with Jive, it was 2 weeks, and she was like, "Yep, I look for odor and food." So that was a very interesting thing, because I've not seen that. Doesn't happen very often. Dogs usually understand it pretty well, but for whatever reason, she didn't. So anyway, so I wanted to kind of go over a little more, and I don't have my regular glasses, so I apologize. We're gonna give you some kind of little definitions. So one of the thing that if you don't have the correct criteria, and we did a Facebook Live a while ago about lumping and slicing, and this goes back to that a little bit. So it's the criteria is what we have that we want them to get what we want them to do to get reinforcement, right? Like this is what the expected behavior for them to earn that reinforcement. So it matters when the timing, and also how to, and it helps you in progressing, right? It helps you with the timing of the particular, what you're paying for. And again, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. My timing is okay. It's not fabulous, but it's okay. Obviously, good enough that I can get behaviors that I need. But if I wanted to have more complex or more, which I did actually get better at it. Um, when we were doing drill team, because I really needed to do a whole bunch of behaviors together, so it had to be pretty clear. And so what I did for that, I went to Natural Encounters, which is a place in Florida where you train birds. Talk about working on your timing. And criteria, because the birds are very unforgiving and they can leave anytime they want to. Dogs don't always get that option at times. So so there's a lot of things you can do to help with that. So the criteria is what behavior you want and what you're going to pay for. So what we see a lot of, and again, not picking on any methodology, just what we see. Sometimes where we see people get stuck is they pay for the same behavior for a long time. They don't progress the behavior, so that one behavior becomes very ingrained, and progressing them is really, really hard. So you want to be and this is where dog training is an art form, right? Is like you need to know, okay, he's got that, then when to move on and when to hold steady. It's really, really a challenge, because we've had there's if you're trying to teach a behavior that takes you months and months to teach, it's something's wrong, right? Dogs don't take that long to learn behavior. They don't. But what happens, and I think what slows things down is we're not progressing at a steady pace. We kind of we like, okay, he sits, and then we wait 2 seconds, and then we pay, and we stick to that too long, versus when he sits really fast at a second, you're going to pay. And then if he takes longer, you wouldn't reinforce it. You would reinforce it maybe with a verbal instead of a treat. So there's a bunch of with a variable reinforcement. So there's many ways to do that, but you need to be clear what you want that behavior to look like. And I think that's where this is what we wanted to kind of address today, is like, what behavior do you want and what do you want it to look like? And then you can start breaking it down and into smaller slices, and then teaching the dog. It's just easier. And then you can start putting things together. But I think what we do is we tend to either lump it all at once and just try to get the whole behavior. And then when you do that, you miss a lot of other parts that you need to have a solid behavior. So sometimes the behavior isn't as solid as you want. And then for some of the ones where you are slicing it too thin, sometimes it's so thin that the progression is really, really slow. So the best place to be is somewhere in the middle, right? Somewhere in the middle, where you progress it here, you're going to add this and add that, and keep keep that learning momentum with that clarity going at a pretty decent clip, depending on your dog, of course. Like some dogs, like Joanne said, her border collie, some dogs you can teach one thing really fast, and other dogs might take a bit longer to figure it out.
Yeah. So one other piece of this I just want to touch on, right? This is where it gets more complicated. We could probably do a whole nother Facebook Live on this, but
yeah,
I think most of what we're talking about tonight, right? We're talking about timing and how to be precise and what you're paying. But a lot of you that watch us, right, you have dogs with issues, or we've had a dog with issues, or you'll have a dog with issues in your lifetime, right? And with that comes the emotional state of the animal. Okay. So we as humans like to pay a thing, a behavior, a this, a that, right? And it's hard if you're not really in tune with reading dog behavior, or reading, what they're telling you, as opposed to, I put my butt on the ground, click sit, right? And so I find it a lot with the look at that commands, right? So like reactive dogs, worried dogs, dogs with worries about people or other dogs. And so that exercise came out, gosh, like 10 years ago, 15 probably.
Probably, yeah.
And so what it was, is, for those of you who don't know, it was you're waiting for the dog to like look at the scary thing, right? And then you pay them. Now it's morphed now to like look at the scary thing and then check back in with me, and that's what we pay now. However, look at that click, right? So think about that from an emotional standpoint. If I'm a dog, and even from a human standpoint, right? If you said there's a boa constrictor over there, right? Look at that. And I was like, oh my God. And you gave me a cookie. Yes, you're paying me for looking at it, but you're also paying me for being in a super fearful, emotional state. And so when we talk about building those neural pathways and the emotions that trigger and go with it, that's why it's so hard to quit addictive things, right? Because we make patterns of them and they make us feel safe, secure, good sometimes. So when you're paying a really terrified emotional state, it's not helping the dog. Yes, you're marking the look at that, but that's not helping the overall make your dog feel more comfortable with dogs, people, etc. All right. So again, that gets into a little more complexity of things. So when we talk about more of the purely positive stuff, just the spending all the time on the clicker and going really slow, sometimes you end up marking something and connecting it to something that you might not see emotionally, which usually ends up not working great in the long run.
Right. And I'm going to be honest, years ago when I first opened my business, I was very much into clicker training, and I still am, but but was into clicker training. I really enjoyed it, and it was a useful tool for me because my timing was not as great, and the clicker helped me with that. However, trying to teach people to use the clicker was very challenging. And with people who are just that are just want their dogs to have just basic behaviors, adding the clicker just made things really more challenging for them. So finally, I went to just using a verbal marker, and most folks can do that and still feel successful. And then as people progress and maybe do more things or get into trick training or competitive obedience, then we can reintroduce the clicker for more precision on the timing. So we found that's why you can use a clicker at my place, but we don't use them as much as we used to for that reason. Most folks have just a hard enough time trying to deal with their dog, come in the building, get through everything, figure out what's going on in class without having the added stress of trying to figure out how to learn click a clicker and all that stuff. So, so while I am not anti-clicker because that's how I started, I just find that most pet owners, adding that extra dimension for them was a little bit more challenging than I would have thought. And so I had to make an adjustment for my business. And so that's what I chose to do. We just use a verbal marker now.
I don't like the clicker. I love the clicker as a tool. Unless I'm teaching a trick, something super precise, right, where like I'm sitting or I'm not having to move, adding that in for me, I'm like, ugh, it makes my timing worse. But if I'm teaching a trick and I can be stationary and I can focus just strictly on the dog and hold it and not have to worry about moving or doing anything else, it works well. I had to use it for the Doberman because, he is who he is. But
anyway. Yeah, but no, it's true because I've used it for other things. And I do use it for loose leash walking because that really helps, even though, again, my lab was a little bit of a stretch on that one. Okay, so I wanted to show a little bit of an example of the criteria for and we have a couple of videos. So what we want you to do is kind of look at it and tell us what you think they're paying for, right? And also how to progress it. I think I have.
And Kathy, does he jump? I'm sorry. Kathy says with Ruger, clicker training wouldn't work being noise sensitive. Verbal cues work.
Correct. So, yeah. And that's the other thing we found too. Dogs that are
noise sensitive dogs.
Noise sensitive, it's really hard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And some of the clickers are ridiculously loud or hard to push or whatever. So yeah.
Right. And sometimes I'm just going to go back to preface this. Sometimes what people think is a how can I say, is a drop in motivation is just that the criteria is too hard, right? It's not that they're not motivated, it's that it's just become it's a little bit, the criteria is too much, it's too hard and not clear enough, right? So actually, Joanne, could you do your video? Because I gotta find
Sure.
this
So
one.
I found this one on YouTube, and basically, I'm just gonna show it to you guys as the person whose video it is actually describing how bad timing created a bad heel in a dog, and so it's just interesting. This reminds me, it's a Malinois, so it sort of reminds me a little bit of like one of those dogs that's like, I only took a couple of times and now I figured it out.
So big
And I'll turn the
screen
sound off here, but
and make it big screen.
yep, I'm coming. Okay. So she put some food in the bowl. And basically what she's trying to do is get the dog to understand kind of a moving heel is the dog touching its shoulder to her left leg. Okay. And so as the dog moves shoulder and then it moves forward, then she lets the dog go eat the reward. Okay. So I'll show you that one more time. So the dog moves in. He's right there. Then he takes a step forward and she says yes and lets the dog go eat the food. Okay. Now I'm sure there was many reps of this, right? That we just don't happen to see here. So the dog eats the food, eats the food, eats the food. This is all in slow motion, so I'm gonna try and make it a little faster here. Putting the food in.
And so you see how if you're not clear on what criteria you're paying, how that can then become a more problem. And again, depending on the dog, some dogs, all it takes is once or twice and you got what you got, good, bad, or otherwise. And then you have other dogs that are might take a little more reps to get it, right? Just like people. And it depends on what you're teaching. Same dog could figure out one thing. So here she marked too far forward, marked his side, not shoulder. So those are all really good you want to be super clear. And again, they're looking for a very specific behavior. That's not to say that you have to be perfect, right? With everything, but you just want, it's just to be clear, like for this behavior, it depends on your goals, right? Yep. They want to do obviously IPO with this dog. So it's important that he's right close to her, and you can see where he's a little he's not as where he needs to be. The criteria is a little bit unclear, right?
Right. But you see how she's working with him here, right? And this is where, like, obedience doesn't need a big correction, right? But she's continuing the motion with the dog. So the dog 100% believes that he, she, whatever it was in the right place.
Mm. Okay. And it is our job to be clear about what that right place is, right?
Yep. So as he's moving, you see that rib cage, the shoulders in front, right? And he's 100% believes he's doing correct, right? And she's moving and she's not telling him, let's try again, right? Which I'll tell you, telling him that would terribly confuse the dog just because he believes he's right here. You can see it. So anyway.
And then you definitely want to go back and correct that. So again, this is a pretty, very, very focused example of that criteria for this particular sport. So I have another one that it's an example of criteria increments, which is, I think, again, and we did like I said, we did a Facebook Live on being a lumper, and I'll own that. I was a lumper before, and as Joanne was, we were both that way. And over the years, we've gotten so much better about not doing that. But it's still we want them to hurry up, especially if you've had a dog that has been really easy to train over in your life. You've had it. I had a beagle, so she she made me very clear. She made me be very clear about what I was asking her, because she was the most challenging dog I ever had, right? In training her. And she was my most challenging dog ever, which I'm thankful to her all the time for that. So this is the criteria is downstay as she takes 2 steps back. And this is obviously, she's already in the beginning, you wouldn't move at all, but this is where she's at in that training. So then she's going to then move a little further back and work on that criteria. Come back and pay, right? And eventually she's going to change her. So her criteria changed a little bit, right? She's now moving another way. She's getting more treats. She moved a little bit. So the criteria, and the dog is telling us he can handle that criteria, right? And that's what I mean. In this one session, she was able to adjust her criteria two times, right? She's stepping further away and she's turning around now, where she wasn't doing that the first time. But the dog is very clear on that criteria. Okay, you stay there as I move away.
Yep. So one question for you guys out there watching, seeing all this, the dog's pretty solid on this. Should this dog be able to go to a training class in a normal room and hold that down the same exact way that she's doing it right now? Anyone? I know it always takes a minute for the answers to come rolling in. No. Why not, Roberta? If you say no, why should that dog not be able to handle that somewhere else? Beth, no. Yep, no. Everybody's saying no. Why not, guys? Many more distractions? Okay. What else? Might be weird without its mat and different distractions. Yep, not a border collie. I would not expect. Dogs don't generalize. Yep, 100%. Other distractions. Yep. So all these are correct answers, right? No duration, context of learning, 100%. You guys are all correct. The big one that I was looking at is if I train that dog on a mat and I take that mat away, right? The dog is missing a piece of the criteria of training. So, right, I would have to start over from the beginning in my house, right? If I didn't put that mat down. So the dogs totally understand down is down. The mat's helping the dog maintain that criteria, right? It's telling it don't move from this mat. You can still get the creeping and the things like that, but it's a helper for the dog. So you have to peel that away. But yeah, and I like place training. It's great. I think it's fine, but don't expect without its mat, without no dogs, without all of those other things that she's creating, the dog knows that behavior inside and out.
Right. And so I'm going to show a really quick video about how lumping and splitting is, and it kind of fits in line with this that we're seeing. Hold on. So you guys can see that, right? Yep. Okay. So this is where for like a stay, right? And this is for all training, right? The most common is distance, duration, and distraction. So with lumping, you're training all those 3 things all at once. See what I mean? You're doing distraction and all at once, and that's what the behavior you want, which is really challenging for the dog when you want to do all those 3 things at once. So and if you split it, and this is where the criteria, one criteria at a time, is really, really helpful.
In this example, what's the basic behaviors distance from the trainer can be added in increments. 1 foot away, 2 feet away, 3 feet away, etc. Next, duration can be trained in the same way with no distance involved. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, on up. Back to the basic behavior and distractions are added, ideally one at a time. There is no requirement for distance or duration. Once the animal is successful with each criteria separately, the trainer can start to combine 2 criteria together. Each combination of 2 is trained together. Once all possible pair combinations have been trained, all 3 criteria can be added together. So, are you a lumper or a splitter?
Now I'm
A great test is to look at how successful your animal is in learning.
so then,
Does he show signs of frustration or stress?
and so that's a really, really great example for a stay, right? Stay behavior. Because people tend to add distance right away. They just want to get that distance in without teaching them distractions and duration. And so that's how a lot of those stay behaviors go away. So the criteria, you have to be real clear. And this helps give that dog the clarity, especially when you're working with a young puppy, right? They don't know anything. So you need to be clear. I want you to stay for this long. Don't worry about and there shouldn't be any distractions. Going back to that video, yeah, that dog, you'd have to get a lot more duration and more distance, and then vary the with and without the mat and all that before you take them into a dog show or a parade or whatever it is. So, and dogs do generalize. Some dogs generalize better than others, which is, again, it's very dog dependent. I said, but yeah, some dogs figure it out really quick and some dogs don't. So, but I like the example because it was really clear. Like these are the 3 things, and you would do them in that order, because people, well, he knows stay if he can stay at home for a long time, but outside in the distracting world, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a really challenge. It's going to be a challenge unless you work on it, right? All those 3 things.
Right. So let's take it. We've seen it in all of our classes. And I know you guys who take classes, you've seen it too, right? So you see the person who comes in and they go, well, he knows it at home, right? And they do 5 times where they're working on sit, stay. I'm going to walk all the way away from you. I'm going to hang out here for 10 seconds. And, somebody next to you is squeaking a toy, right? And the dog breaks every time. Okay. So what are you paying your dog for? Well, number one, you're not paying your dog, right? Unless, and this is with the more novice, like basic obedience people, right? They'll come back, they'll ask their dog to sit again, and then they'll give it a cookie for sitting, even though you're working on stay. So when you think about that scenario, the dog goes, yeah, I sit, and you do some stuff, and I get up, then you come back and I sit again. So when you think about it, right, or hopefully you're not overcorrecting your dog because you are not doing your part of the deal there, right? So what are you reinforcing or not reinforcing? So if the dog, and this is, if I see a dog do something twice, let alone a 3rd time where they're doing it wrong, we have to change something, okay? Because that means whatever you're marking, the dog doesn't understand. Hey, can you not do that? Thanks. It's something else.
Something quieter.
Something quieter. I know, good dog. He's like, I do this and keep myself busy. I know, but the quiet toys. All right. So yeah. So if they're messing something up, and again, I like the 3s, right? So if they're doing something 3 times, you're starting to create a pattern. So if they're not completing what you're asking them to do, and if you watched last week, you could have seen with the Doberman when I was trying to get, paws up, and he's like, I don't get it. I had to switch something.
It's a prince.
He couldn't figure out how to lift his left foot up. He'd lift his right foot, and he's like, I don't get it. I don't get what you want. So I'm like, okay, let's back it up. How do I mark and reinforce you putting your left foot up too? And he's like, what? So I had to totally change the exercise to get him to understand that piece of it. Okay. So
he's very handsome.
He is ridiculously good looking.
Yes.
All right.
He needs it so he doesn't die. Anyway, but yeah, and that's what I mean. Some dogs, I know, if you've had a really exceptionally intelligent dog that figures out stuff right away, and then you get another one that maybe isn't as quick to pick up on stuff. It just means you need to go back a little bit or help him out. And it could be that it's just one piece that he's having a hard time with, not everything. So it's really important to just give the dog some grace and figure it out, especially if you're training multiple dogs. It's really hard. Or especially if you have a dog that already understands a lot of stuff, but they have that the criteria is clear. You made it very clear for your dog. And again, for your young dog. So here are some of the things, for example, like Joanne says, when you see some behaviors. I have she's not going to be a foster for long, a little beagle that I have with me. And one behavior that I noticed as you get to know the dogs in your home is she has an interesting behavior. If I am sitting there and she's sitting next to me, and one of the cats come or a dog comes in, she gets a little bit resource guardy about that. So I saw the behavior once and I thought, that's interesting. She wasn't super aggressive about it, but I noticed the change in her behavior. So I noted it. And I was like, okay, let's see if it happens again. And sure enough, it did happen again. And at that point, then she lost the privilege to be sitting next to me on the couch. And it's hard because the dog had just come from a bad situation and is still trying to figure stuff out. But I needed to interrupt. I couldn't, and this goes back for those of you who do rescue, I couldn't allow that behavior to continue, because especially if she was going to stay in my house, right? I have other dogs, I have cats, and I cannot have dogs that will fight, right? Especially the cats. I mean, you can't keep them from going wherever they want to. So it's like, you can't go after the cats. So I gave her, I interrupted the behavior. I put her back in her crate in that moment and then gave her another chance to be right. And she's still trying to figure things out too in her world, right? Because she came from there's not much in her world. She was in a lab in a cage for the first year of her life. So, but I still couldn't, I wasn't harsh, but I did have to interrupt the behavior and not allow her to do that, because that's not something that I would want to continue to repeat and then have to change. It was easier to interrupt it. And the criteria is no, you don't get to do that ever. Period. That's a hard no. If I sit there, you don't get to do that behavior. And so those are things when you note it. And for dogs that are rescue, it's challenging, right? And for her, just putting her back in her crate and her losing the privilege of sitting next to me was good enough for her to be like, okay, that's probably a bad idea, right? So it's about being very clear what's okay and what's not okay. So like Joanne says, if you see a behavior more than 2 and 3 times, you have to interrupt it. You have to step back and think, okay, why am I getting that behavior, and what can I do to then change that behavior and so they can give me the behavior I want? Because unfortunately, we do just let it go, and then it becomes this huge big problem, right? Later on, and then it's more. It takes longer to fix it. It's easier when you just interrupt the behavior, or you make it very clear what behavior you do want, right? In that moment, right? Huh? How did she know that what she did got her back in her crate? Because she came across my body to go after the cat, so I caught her and put her back in the crate. So incredibly, my timing was very good on that one. So she was coming across my body to go after my cat, which I caught her and I put her back in the crate. So it was pretty instantaneous. It was a very, very good timing. Yes.
I'm pretty sure your timing was only that good so the beagle didn't get beat up by the cat. You're like, no, don't kill her.
Yeah, right. So yes, my timing was very good on that one. And then I keep an eye on it and I keep testing her. So then now, Deb, that's a really good question. Now I interrupted it. I did correct her, if you will, putting her back in the crate. Now what I do is I have her by me on the sofa and I reinforce her for the other animals coming in. And so she looks to me and she's not so worried about the other animals, right? And she was just, in her case, she was just kind of testing it because she's starting to feel more comfortable in my house and so on. So I know, and it's weird. It's very situational. Like if I'm not sitting there and the cats come in the room, she doesn't care. It's only when I'm sitting there. So yeah. So when I sit there and I'm sitting there with her, I reinforce her for not doing it. The other animals come in and it's not as big of a problem. But yes, I interrupted that behavior. I could not allow her to do that because you're right. My cats would kick her butt. And then the other one would be, I would have, I have a very old cat and that's the one she decided she was going to go after too. So, but when the cats are loose and and we're not in that setup, she's totally fine with the cats. Totally fine with the cats.
Can I have this one, please? Thank you.
We no, if I missed my timing, Deb, I would have just reinforced. I would have just, since I couldn't have interrupted the behavior, I would have just then worked on giving her cookies while the other dogs, I could easily set that up where I could have the other animals come in and I can reinforce her. If I missed the timing, I wouldn't have done anything. I just missed it. Right. But I just happened to be there and I noticed her change in behavior. And as soon as she took off to go after the cat, I grabbed her and I put her in the crate just for a few seconds and I gave her a chance to be right, and voila, she was like, oh, okay. And so now the criteria is if I'm sitting next to you, you sit there too. You can look at them, but you can't go after them. It's unacceptable behavior. Yeah, she's great and she's great in every other way, but that was a little bit of that's an interesting behavior. Not sure where she got it or why she decided to try it, because she's not really been in that situation in her life. She's been in a crate for her first year. She never got a chance to do that. So why all of a sudden that's a thing? I don't know. It's weird.
Yep. So one of the things that's really great when you're training something, if it's not going well, or if you're just not sure, one of the best recommendations is to film yourself. Okay. And so show your friends with no sound, what do you think I'm teaching the dog to do here? Right. And if your friends are like, oh, you're totally teaching the dog to blah, blah, blah. And you're like, that's not at all what I was teaching the dog to do. Right. Or somebody says, I'm not sure, I can't tell. Your dog is saying the same thing. Okay. Right. So this is, if you have, not great timing, or you're unsure of what you think you're doing, or if there's a better way, I'm telling you, get out the cell phone, just take a quick little video, show it to your friends at class, right? What do you think I'm doing with this dog? And if they don't answer you right and you're struggling, your dog has no idea either. So we're going to give you guys some guessing games. So I am teaching my foster dog Roscoe something here. And so I want you guys to see if you can guess what I am teaching him. And I will share this here. Let me go back here. Okay. So I'm not starting yet. I'm just trying to get him. Okay. So here we go. Starting now.
And now.
And now. All right. So no sound. Do we have any guesses thus far? That one was cheating.
Roberta, she figured it out.
Teaching him how to shake, right? And you can see he's a little timid and tentative about giving me his paw, but boy, that dog loves food. So.
Oh my God, he's so cute.
He is very cute. So watching this though, and again, he did not know this exercise. This is the first video of me teaching him anything. So do you think it's clear to him what I'm asking him? Think he's understanding what I want?
Not in that moment.
No, but what did I change? I'm gonna where's my pause button? It's back under here. There it is. What did I change to make him not understand right away? So we talked about kind of like that mat, right? I changed one little thing. Did anyone see what it was?
Your placement.
Sure was.
Yeah.
100%. Right? So I had the food right in front of him every other time.
Yep. And then you change your hand placement.
Yep. And I changed my hand placement. So he's, yep, I got it. As long as the food's in front of my face, it might take me a couple of seconds, but I will give you that left paw. And here he's like, why is the food way up there? I don't get it. Okay. So just that simple change, right? Even though we're only doing one little thing, just that simple change for him was enough to make him go, I don't know now. He got it pretty quick, and that it was okay. I didn't stress him out. It wasn't a too long of a time. It wasn't something he couldn't figure out, right? But it was definitely a change. I mean, it took him a minute,
right? And so what could Joanne have done to smooth out that transition? That's a really great video, actually. What could have Joanne done differently? Because again, when we're in the moment, we might have, we didn't think of it, or we didn't do it, or it's, or we're in a hurry, which is usually what our problem is. But I digress. So what could she have done? Because she went from the food in front of him to the food far away. So what could she have done to help that to bring that, to lower that criteria a little bit, to have the treat hand not as high, right? She could have, instead of being right in front of him, could have been a little bit higher, and then eventually had it further. But yeah, that's that somewhere in the middle, right? We just, and the truth is that behavior, right, move hand higher in slower increments. She could have gone a little slower to get that behavior. And so little things like that we have to look at. Again, was it torturing the dog? No, the dog was like, okay, weird, but all right, I can do that now this way. It's fine. That's what happens, right? Because the truth is, he learned it, and he probably is fine with it, even with maybe that criteria wasn't perfect. But it's something that you want to think about when you're not getting the behaviors you want, or you're getting behaviors that you're like, what is that? Right? So you can go back and go, okay, what can I do to make it clear for you that this is what I want, and this is the stuff I need you to do, right?
Yep.
Because that's a tougher, she, even though he figured it out and he likes food, but if you have a dog that's not so into food, or maybe doesn't, has a little more challenge figuring out, because it's no different than us, right? Some of us were better at certain classes than others, right? And so we understood certain concepts easier than some of our counterparts in high school or school, right? And same with dogs. Some dogs will be like, oh yeah, I got that, I understand that concept, and other dogs will be like, I don't get it. And there's nothing wrong with your dog. It's just that in that moment, in that time, for whatever reason, that concept's a little bit more challenging for that dog in that time frame, right?
Yep. So I have one more to show you. This one's a little harder, and I don't think Nancy was paying 100% attention to the video when I first showed it to me. She goes, "What are you teaching him?" So I'm like, stop multitasking and watch. So, we have to really lower the distractions for Nancy when you're teaching her something new. Squirrel.
Yes, that's right. All right.
So hang on. So this one, I am gonna share again. All right.
So what is she teaching him? Any guesses?
This one's harder.
Yeah, that's right, Roberta. It's a leave it command. Yep. It's a precursor to the leave it command.
Yep. And although I'm going to show you, although it was hard in the beginning for him, right? If we timed that, that's a good 15, 20 seconds, right? That he sits on my hand the first time. So he's clearly like, you have food in your hand. Why aren't you giving it to me? I don't know what's happening. He doesn't know what I'm asking at all, right?
Yeah. Kim, it does look like a high five because he does like to use his paws a lot. That's why it was kind of easy for him to learn that shake because he naturally uses his paws. So that's what I mean. Some stuff is easier for him. Like he would easily learn a high five or whatever because he tends to want, you could see he likes to want to use his paws for stuff, which is interesting. But
Yep.
yeah, in this case, he was learning to leave it.
And look how much faster every time he leaves my hand with food in it alone, right? Each time he gets faster and faster with it. He's like, oh, that, right? So we went from 15, 20 seconds in the beginning to, oh, you don't want me to poke at you. You're like, nope, don't want you to poke at me.
Yep. And eventually you would have that hand would be an open hand, and he would have to leave it and get reinforced from the other hand. And just to be clear, the reason we teach it, leave it this way, a lot of people use it, leave it with stuff on the floor, which eventually you want to get to that. The big problem is you cannot say leave it and then allow them to take whatever's on the floor. Because to be clear, when you ask them to leave it, they can't have whatever is there. When you're using the word leave it, they can't have what's there. All right. In real life, if you say leave that dead carcass, you're not going to say, okay, take it. So don't teach that. Don't teach it that way because that's what people put it on the floor. The dog leaves it and then they'll let them take it. Well, the problem is in real life, you are not going to allow them to take it. So they should always get reinforced from your hand all the time for leaving it. Like Joanne was teaching them. Eventually she'd have an open hand treat. The dog would leave it and then she'd still reinforce from the other hand. Right. Because, from the hand she was paying him with. That's the reason when you teach him a leave it command, you're not gonna say, okay, take it. Because in real life, you're not going to do that. You're just not going to do that.
Yeah.
Because especially if they're leaving something that could kill them.
A pill or something, right? If you drop your thing of pills.
Or a knife with food or something. Yeah, right. I've had that.
Like, I'm just picturing Jive with like the Joker stitches because she picks up a knife with like.
Yep. And that's why I taught her that leave it because she would totally do it.
Yep. So Beth, you asked a really great question. Are you simultaneously verbalizing leave it? And the answer was no. Oh. And here's the reason why. Because I never know what like my own dogs, I can pretty much tell what they're going to get right away and what they're not. But the first couple times that I'm introducing something new, I never put verbals to it because if I mess it up or the dog doesn't understand what I'm asking, and you are a border collie person, so you know how quick they can generalize things sometimes, right? I never want to have an oops on a word or a verbal that they don't understand. So by the end of that, yes, I absolutely, if I put my hand down, I was like, leave it. And he was like, oh, okay. And he would back right off. And then he goes, oh, so that thing means this. And I'm like, yep. So when I say that, now you can backtrack it to say back off and leave that thing alone. So that's a really great question.
Yeah. And you always want to get the behavior before you name it.
Yep.
Always get the behavior. Like in Nosework, we don't say search right away because they don't know what the hell we're doing. We just let them go find the boxes and let them have and do the behavior. Then eventually we'll add the verbal, which doesn't take very long. I mean, it's very fast. But in case that, something happens or they get scared or whatever, especially for a young puppy, I rarely ever name stuff until they get it. Like I take time. And for the Beagle, since she's got some stuff going on, she's worried and she's got some anxiety. I'm just now teaching her to sit, but I haven't even called. You can't say sit because she still doesn't know what it is. Right now, I'm just getting the behavior. Right. And some of the other stuff, I'm because she's got some anxiety and stuff going on. I want to make sure that it doesn't get that I can consistently get it before I call it, before I start naming it. So yeah, it is a good question, because a lot of people tend to call, because the verbal stuff is usually for us. Most of the dogs already understand what they're they don't need us to say anything. They already know. Even though you do want certain things on a verbal, like a recall and the leave it command, definitely want to put that on a verbal really, really strongly, because that's a life and death thing right there. So
Yep. And I mean, stuff we do is sometimes in my intermediate class in obedience is if you guys ever want to just try this out, just do between a sit and a down, right? Do it 3 different ways. Do it with your verbal and your hand command together. Do it with just your verbal, with no moving, no motion, no leaning forward or anything like that. And then do it with just a hand command. Which way does your dog understand it? And do they understand it equally all 3 ways? Usually when you put a verbal with the hand commands, right, that's how the dogs best get it. Same as us, right? I'm giving you multiple different cues. Most dogs will understand a silent hand command before they'll understand a verbal. It's just kind of, they're much more cued into motion and body language than they are speech. So not that you can't teach them, right? You can absolutely teach a sitter down just by a verbal, but try it at home. See if your dogs get it, right?
Right. So it's one of the things is you want to be very clear with your criteria. And those of you who do obedience, that is where you really have to be crystal clear on exactly what you want, because it matters that, like that Malinois, right? The shoulder has to be resting on the knee, not the rib cage, not you want that to be a certain place. So that's where a clicker or a good verbal marker, or good timing, a good marker is helpful. But for the rest of us that are just when we're looking at just behavior, and you're getting some some things you don't want. So and I'll give you an example of one is pulling on a leash. Some dogs find that very reinforcing, and they're gonna want to pull. And so it is not okay for the dogs to pull sometimes, and then other times they don't. You have to be very consistent with it, otherwise you're never going to be able to. The clarity isn't there. They don't know why when can they pull here, this or this, so it can't be at all ever. So it's one of those things that you want to be really consistent with, and you want to be clear what that criteria is, right?
Clearly it's time to play in my house. So
so the same in nose work, the criteria, and this is where I go back to the dog sports a little bit. In nose work, the criteria is you get the odor, you find this odor cone, you trace it back to source, and you put you go to source, right? That is the criteria for nose work. It's not this far away. It's like you want to be very clear that criteria is there, because you're going to build the rest of your career, the rest of your skills on that, right? So if that's not clear and the dog doesn't understand exactly what they're doing, then it becomes a big problem, right? And that's why sometimes, and not for all dogs, but sometimes in the different training methodologies, when it's operant, the dogs aren't as good in problem solving right away. They take a little longer to learn that and get better at it, because all their understanding is nose to the odor. Where when we do it with classical conditioning, which is what we do with food and all that stuff, usually the picture is hit the odor cone, trace it back to source, and give them, let and go straight to the odor. So dogs then tend to be a little bit better at problem solving in that case. Sometimes, well, we teach it earlier, put it that way, sooner, instead of the odor is important, but problem solving is critical, right? In that case. So you have to be very clear what you're paying. So in nose work, if you pay sometimes at source, or sometimes you're this far away, or sometimes you're this far away, early on, you're going to it's not clear to the dog where you're paying and what they're getting paid for. So you want to be clear, right? Same with the contact performance and agility. Do I hit it this time or this time? Can I run it this time? If there's a tunnel in front of it, should I hit it or not? do I get to get away with not doing? You know what I mean? You want to be very clear what that criteria is. Every time you must hit that yellow contact, right? No matter what's in front of it or where you're going or what I'm doing. That's no matter what I'm doing, you have to hit that yellow contact instead of, well, only when I'm running at it or only when there's a tunnel in front of it or only when there's a jump in front of it. So you want to be very clear what that behavior you want, and what you're willing to pay. And also, sometimes you're like, I don't that behavior is not that important, I guess. And sometimes you just let it go, right? Like a recall for me is really important. And so I try to be very clear about that. And if
That's me with competitive obedience. I just need a 170. That's it.
so the recall is important. And today that my two dogs tested it. They were running around playing, and then they were just like, I want to play. I understand that, but you can't. You got to come to me. It was really hard for them. Well, harder for the shepherd. The lab was pretty good about it. Anyway, but so those are things you want to consider when your dog is when you're getting behaviors you don't like, and are you reinforcing them or not? And I think Sue Poor said something that was good. Yeah, sometimes they offer you a behavior you could take at that moment and teach what you want, right? And now, so that's the other thing, depending on where you're at in your training or in your learning, if you have a young adolescent dog, sometimes you're going to take a lesser and end the training session, because sometimes that's what's supposed to happen. You cannot, you just have to, if they take, we're going to reduce your criteria in that moment to be able to then move on. So anyway, any other questions? That was really good. Good questions and good insight.
The natives are restless, so
they need to have dinner. See, I fed my dogs early. I wasn't having it because I fed my dogs and my cats and my husband, so everybody got fed.
It's not even the food part. It's like squeaking, playing, squeak. He's rolling around, chewing, squeaking the toy, and everybody's like, "What are you doing? We want to play." Oh, goodness.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight. It was great, good feedback. And if you have any other additional questions on what we covered, let us know. Email us at Nancy@FurYourCanine or Joanne at For Better For Worse, and we'll try to answer the questions as best we can.
And if anybody knows a home for that cute little trick dog that I showed you tonight, let me know. He is up for adoption. You too can have a squeaky ball in the background of your life.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.